My name is Kim McKee, and I'm a student in the iTech program. The topic that I chose for my presentation is called Understanding the Teach Act and the Decisions of the Instructional Designer. It's important to know what an instructional designer is and what they do. Basically, this person works either alone or with a faculty member or someone who's in need of a training course, but they work to develop the course content. And there's a variety of different classroom situations that designers work in. They work face-to-face, online, synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid or blended learning, and distance education classrooms. As course content is developed, it includes a lot of materials that are subject to copyright laws. So it's important that the instructional designer follow the laws and the guidelines so that the ownership rights are protected, and at the same time students are able to glean the information they need to learn. In 2002, the TEACH Act, which stands for Technology, Education, and Copyright Harmonization, was signed by President Bush as an amendment to the Copyright Act of 1976. Basically, what the TEACH Act does is expands the copyright exemptions for use in online and distance education course designs. While there was a lot of support for the TEACH Act, there was also some opposition to it because it did still set a lot of guidelines, but it did try to make a fair playing field or a learning environment, I guess you could say, for students, because the laws were different for in face-to-face classes as opposed to online. So it kind of helped level that playing field, and it also helped in situations like with handicapped people or people who may not live in a region where they can get to an education institution in person. So now they're able to sign up for classes online and through distance education, and they can get a quality education the same as if they were face-to-face with an instructor. So as a fact file to this, it's important that instructional designers serve as subject matter experts in the area of copyright. The TEACH Act encompasses a lot of things, but here are some of the main things that stand out about it. It does ensure that learning experiences for face-to-face, distance, and online classroom environments are similar. It applies to accredited nonprofit educational institutions or government institutions. It mandates that these institutions develop policies about copyright, that they distribute the information, and that they also promote copyright compliance on their campuses and in their businesses. It mandates institutions to notify students and those taking training courses that materials may be copyright protected. It also states that only students enrolled in a course can receive the materials available through one of these online learning environments. It expands the receiving locations for distance education beyond classrooms to anywhere technology is available. And again, this is important for the reasons of serving those who might not be able to have access to a college campus or a training facility in their area. It also allows for storage of copyrighted materials on a server so that asynchronous performances and displays can happen so that people can learn. And it also ensures that instructional designers and others who design courses have access to a wide range of works when developing courses for these virtual classroom settings. Another fact file is that the TEACH Act is just one of several exemption options available to instructional designers when they're considering the copyright for the things that they will include in their course designs. So it doesn't limit the fair use doctrine in any way. It's just something that helps expand what's available. These are some things that an instructional designer can do based on the TEACH Act. They can share any work in an amount equal to what would be shared in a face-to-face classroom setting. Again, this levels the playing field so that everyone gets the best education possible. They can share performances of non-dramatic literary works, such as poems or reading a short story. That's permitted. You can share performances of non-dramatic musical works, but you cannot share operas or musicals, things like that. share reasonable and limited portions of other types of work except digital education works, and this references those workbooks or online learning environments that are basically extra pay sites and resources, so you can't copy those and put them in your course for free. You can share with students and serve students at any location. Access and retain materials used in course content for the length of the class session, which means it's only available to those students who are enrolled in that class for the length of the class session. And there is some discussion over what exactly length of the class session is, because there's not a strict guideline for that. You can, if you're building a course shell in a LMS system like Blackboard, though, you can leave those things up for the duration of the semester or until the class ends, and then access is not supposed to be granted anymore. You can copy and store for the length of time needed to complete digital transmissions to students. Again, that's saying the same thing, that once that length of time for that course is finished, then the students should not be able to access it anymore. And you can digitize portions of analog works if there are no digital versions available, or if it's not in an accessible form. And here's another fact file for you. Instructional designers should develop checklists and follow guidelines and policies of the laws and their employers when using materials that are subject to copyright. Here are some things that an instructional designer cannot do. They cannot share commercially available digital education materials labeled with a specific label from the Act, primarily for performance or display as part of mediated instructional activities transmitted via digital networks. And again, this includes electronic workbooks or textbooks or paper versions that you might scan and put in a PDF and digitize that way. You cannot do that. Share illegal copies of copyrighted works under the U.S. copyright law if the instructional designer knew or had reason to believe, again quoted from the Act, that they were not lawfully made and acquired. A designer cannot share works that might be viewed or listened to outside of the class. You cannot share works that are not directly related to the content of the course. You cannot digitize an analog work already available in a digital form. Cannot show films or videos beyond limited portions, and use more than allowed as fair use. And then again, another fact file for you. Instructional designers should use a check sheet with each course design and document where resources are obtained. All the resources must be obtained legally to maintain protection under the Teach Act, and this documentation should be stored with the course design files. Here are some cautions of the Teach Act. Always use caution when downloading materials from the internet. You should cite all sources, obtain permission as needed, understand licensed materials, and use the various laws and acts as a guide. There are penalties if you get caught violating the Copyright Acts. They come in both civil and criminal forms. Statutory damages, which are actual damages, are not less than $750 and not more than $30,000 per work infringed. And there's also willful infringement, which is basically intentional use of something you know you should not use. Those fines can amount up to $150,000 per work infringed. Possible assessment of court costs and attorney fees, and there's also a criminal element to that. You can be imprisoned for up to 5 years and fined up to $250,000 per offense. So it's pretty serious stuff if you don't follow the rules and the guidelines. Another fact file: instructional designers develop and/or design courses for face-to-face, online, and distance education classrooms. Understanding copyright laws and guidelines is key to legal and successful course designs. And this is a sample checklist, and I won't read through it, but basically every university or educational setting develops some sort of checklist. And I mentioned this earlier about the designer using a checklist and storing it with his or her course files. So here's one that's used at the University of Texas, and you can kind of look through there and see all the important things that you should be checking and looking for and documenting as you build courses. again, more of that checklist. And then just to kind of take the Teach Act a little bit further in understanding it, because there are so many different situations and scenarios that come up when you develop classes. I've picked 3 more common situations to look at. Designer scenario number 1 is called Foreign Fiasco, and basically the gist is that there's an instructor who wants to develop a course, and they want to include part of a French film in the course, and they think that it's a necessary piece for their course to relay what they need for an assignment. So as a designer, it's important to know if U.S. copyright laws pertain to films produced in another country, and if you have to have special permission. Also, another factor might be, do you include the clip or tell the instructor that you cannot include it due to the copyright issue? So how do you handle that situation? And the solution to that is that the Teach Act does address this, and basically what it says is when a copyright owner is an established resident of a country with a U.S. copyright treaty, his or her work receives the sample protection under the law as a work produced in the United States. And one reason I included this is because it's important to remember for designers who do a lot of work for online environments that you can look beyond the scope of the Teach Act to fair use and other documents to help you decide what the correct answer to your situation might be. The second scenario is called Documentary Dilemma, and basically we have an instructor in the history department who wants to include an entire documentary in his Blackboard course shell about World War II, and he needs it for his lesson. So what do you tell this person? Can he put the entire documentary in the Blackboard course shell, and if so, are there any special permissions required? So how do you handle it? And the answer to that is that you cannot place the entire documentary on the Blackboard shell. The Teach Act is clear. It states that reasonable and limited amounts of other works, such as audio-visual works, can be used, and that's certainly not an entire documentary. So also important to note that there's no provision for exemptions of fiction versus fact-based materials. And the third design scenario I called Compilation Crisis. Basically, we have an English instructor who needs to compile several articles and pieces of information and materials from various sources, and they're not available in the school library, so she wants to find them, create an online electronic reserve within her Blackboard shell, and you have to decide if it's legal for her to do that. Can you create a compilation of information if it's not available in the school library, and if so, are there any special permissions? So how do you handle that? And the answer to that is that you cannot place that compilation on the Blackboard course shell. The Teach Act does make mention that there of no reserves for using material in directed and mediated instruction. Articles fall under the display exemption. Only amounts comparable to a face-to-face session may be displayed. Displaying a downloaded PDF article on a course website throughout the semester is not supported by the Teach Act, and compiling these readings would constitute a substitute for students having to purchase a regular course reader, whether in paper or electronic format, and this is not exempted under the Teach Act. So here's a list of my references, and as you can see, copyright is an important part for an instructional designer, and I hope that this presentation helped you learn a little more about that. Thank you.